Okay, so we're going to pick up on this little series we started. Seems like a long time ago now. We've had a few things in between. That called Fearless. And last time we were together, we talked about the question, are you afraid of God? And how there just can be an underlying, not fear of the Lord type fear, because we're supposed to do that. That's a healthy respect and awe for who God is. But this is being afraid of God, that God's mad at you, or God's going to do something bad to you, or if you don't do things exactly right, he's going to, strike you with a bolt of lightning and things like that. That's not a good, healthy fear. And so that is really the basic, primary aspect of our relationship with God. Is we should not be afraid of him whatsoever. We should be able, as comfortable as we are to share here with one another, that we share our lives with him and not be afraid to confess our sins to him, because that's what it says. Perfect love, his love is perfect. That's what actually casts out fear. There's no fear in love. Following that basic fear that we need to deal with, the second one is people. Are you afraid of people? So I come to this as someone who has lived a majority of my life with an underlying sense of fear, uncertainty about people, not, what are they thinking about me? Or can they hurt me? Things like that. And just as Jesus said that the greatest commandment is to love God with all our heart and soul and mind and strength, and he says, and the second is like the first. I've never paid too much attention to that part of that. The second is like the first. And the second is you're to love your neighbor as yourself. People. You're to love people as you love yourself. And he says that is like the first. And now I've started thinking about, well, how is that like the first? Well, how is my love for people like my love for God? So I kind of wrote it down because it's I'd probably get it all confused if I tried to explain it off the top of my head. Yeah, I can't find where I wrote it down. Well, when you love God, and we're to love God wholeheartedly with our mind, heart, soul, strength, then God says we are to love our neighbor, other people, like that. And I'm trying to remember how it was so profound. So God loves us with his love. And with that love that we have received from God, we are then to love others as God has loved us. As Jesus said, as I have loved you, as we love ourselves. And when we do that, what we're actually doing is we're loving God. God said, Jesus said, how do you love him? By keeping his commandments. What's his commandment? Love one another. I give you a new commandment. He saves that for the end of his ministry to tell his disciples this. And so when we love people, we are loving God. And if we love God, we are obligated to love people. In other words, they are not separate things. So at least in my mind, maybe not in yours, but in my mind, I would view, well, if I do something for somebody else, I'm not thinking that by, loving another person, oh, I'm expressing my love for God. That's not, I haven't really thought like that. But it is. And Jesus said, as you have done it to the least of these, my brethren, you have done it to me. And so to see those as so connected. So we're to love God without any fear. How are we to love other people without fear? Because if we're afraid of God, that's going to impede our love. It's hard to really love somebody that you're afraid of. If you're thinking, why are you afraid of somebody? Because you're afraid they're going to do something to you to hurt you or be something bad to you. That's not going to engender a love for that person. It hinders the love for that person. So in the same way, if we're afraid of people, it makes it very difficult for us to wholeheartedly love them if I feel like, no, I got to protect myself from them. Does that make sense? Yeah. That's kind of the thing I saw when he says the first is like the second, because they both operate on the same principles. So when we love people, that's how we love God. And in 1 John, that's pretty much what he talks about throughout that letter is you can't say you love God and then when somebody comes to you for help and you don't help them, how's the love of God live with you? So it's loving God is expressed by loving people, and by loving people is expressing our love for God. But when fear comes into the equation, that's what's the word? The scientific word, inertia. That's like it hinders that love, interferes with it. So it may seem strange as we're thinking here now about fear of people. We're going to look at 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the love chapter. How does that relate to being afraid of people? Well, I had never really put it together until I went to the camp last week and one of the speakers brought this out. 1 Corinthians 13, where do you pretty much can count on you're going to hear that?
At a wedding.
Yeah, absolutely, at a wedding. It's going to be on people's walls, hanging on a plaque. It's lifted out of the context. He's not talking about weddings in 1 Corinthians 13. He's not talking about weddings. That's not the issue. Not that isn't a good thing. But let's just take a quick run through 1 Corinthians, because that's the context. And that's what 1 Corinthians 13 is all about, and why it's right at the heart of the book. So in Corinth, you look in the first couple of chapters, and you see this competition going on, these divisions. People saying, "Whoa, I'm of Peter," or "I'm of Cephas." They were following different leaders. So, we see the seeds of denominations here in the first couple chapters of 1 Corinthians. Remember last week, I said that in the world today, there are 47,000, estimated around that number, denominations in the world. 47,000 denominations. And they're all saying, I'm of infant baptism, I'm of this way of doing baptism. I'm of doing this way of communion. I'm doing this way of communion. And I'm doing this way of church government. I'm doing it this way. And you could just go down the list of what has caused churches to divide over. And you go to 1 Corinthians, you see it right there. So why would, or what's at the heart of that? That you would, so you want to listen to Peter more, you want to listen to Cephas more, but then you use it, you weaponize it, and now it's where, well, I'm of Peter, I'm of Cephas. I mean, this is a big problem. It's the first thing that Paul addresses in this letter. These people are dividing over that. And if you reduce it down to why would they do that? Well, because we're right. You don't quite got it all. And so I don't want to be contaminated by your deception. At least that's how it plays out today for sure. And I mean, well, we know there was the idea that this is going to contaminate us. It's that slippery slope. You start here and the next thing, who knows where you're going to be. So there's a fear. There's a fear there. There's a fear of being on the wrong side of a theological issue. And that gets attached to other people, that gets attached to people. So you can see there's fear involved in that. And there's power struggles. He uses words like jealousy. There's jealousy, there's strife, which is fighting. There's pride, there's boasting. So there's power struggles going on. Some are saying, oh, I've got superior wisdom. And so obviously in that situation, you're looking at another person. Well, you're going to deprive me of my power, my where I want to be. I'm climbing the corporate ladder or church corporate ladder, and you're getting in my way or whatever. So anyway, you see this jealousy, strife going on here. They're judging one another. They're arrogant against one another. Chapter 4:6. You know, that's the idea of, well, I'm better than you. I'm better than you. And that's an insecurity. That's a fear. Because you're saying, I've got to be better than you, because if you're better than me, then something's wrong with me. So I'm going to be better than you. And then you get to chapter 5, and in the midst of this, you know, these people are saying, I'm better, you know. There's incest going on in the church. Paul is like, you're kidding me, right? You guys are doing this, and you're bragging about being these spiritual giants. He says, you're arrogant, you're boasting, you're covetous, revilers, swindlers. You know, there's just a lot of interpersonal fighting going on, just basically going on in this church, competition. And then he talks in chapter 6 about they're suing one another. And Paul says, why not be wronged and defrauded by someone? Isn't that better than going to court in front of the pagans and Christians suing one another? So obviously they're afraid that they're going to get cheated out of something, and Paul's basic, well, get cheated out of, who cares? That's more. And you go back to, you know, Jesus praying that we'll be one, and you come to this church and it's like, they're so far off base here. There's revenge, and then there's dehumanizing of women. You know, the men are going to prostitutes, Christians in the church. You know, he talks about that, and he addresses that. You have women who are leaving their husbands because they're not Christians, and you have husbands divorcing their wives because they're not Christian. So you got these marital wars going on here at this church. And then they're judging and arguing with one another because of what they're eating, you know? He talks about that, you know, you're wounding another person's conscience by you saying, well, I can eat anything, you know, because this is a mixed church. There's Jewish people and there's pagan people. And so they're saying, hey, I'm free, I can eat anything. You know, you're just bound up by your legalism here. And in the process, you're actually doing damage to the other person. So you get to chapter 11 and you see people are coming to the Lord's Supper drunk. Before they get there, they show up and they've been drinking already to the point that they're drunk. So there's disrespect, not only for the Lord, but disrespect for the other people. And then you get to chapter 12. And now you see there's divisions over the spiritual gifts. So the people who have certain gifts, and the implication is that people who are speaking in tongues, that's some sign of that they're extra spiritual than those who don't. So they're wanting personal attention. Chapter 14, there's confusion, there's chaos over the whole issue of tongues. And then you get to chapter 15, you got people in this church who are denying the very basis for the faith, the resurrection. They're denying that the resurrection even happens, or if it's a real thing that can happen. And Paul takes that whole chapter that we studied to address that issue. So there's just a simple phrase to describe the Corinthian church. They were a mess. I mean, they were just a hot mess of infighting, division, moral mess, just theological, all the way they were. And then right smack dab in the middle of all that, Paul writes one of the most amazing pieces of literature that's ever been written by a human being, 1 Corinthians 13. And why does he write it? Because this church is a mess in terms of their personal relationship. Nowhere does he commend them for their love for one another. Other churches, he will do that right off the bat. You know, your love for the brethren is known throughout all the churches. He doesn't say that in 1 Corinthians. He calls them spiritual babes. He's just stunned by, what's going on there. So when you see that, what he is giving is the antidote to the problems in human relationships. And the problem is love, agape love, the kind of love as he describes here in this chapter. If this was a plan or something that people intentionally tried to live according to, you wouldn't even need the rest of the Bible. This would solve all the world's problems. If Putin had this kind of an attitude, any world leader had this kind of attitude, you'd be thinking twice before, you're launching bombs over on people and killing them and, innocent people. I mean, it's so contrary to this. But we know that that's not the case. So when we come to this question of, are you afraid of people? 1 Corinthians chapter 13 is the antidote for that. It is the cure for fear. And the cure for fear is love, because they're not compatible. They're not compatible. And love is stronger, more powerful. And when you begin to practice love of intentionally seeking the welfare and the good of others, that changes you. It changes you. I'm speaking from experience, not that I've got this down, but I've seen this happen. And you guys, I'm speaking to you. You should all be speaking to me, because you guys are a lot further down the road than I am, because I've been on the receiving end of it. But it's so true, and it's really not complex. I mean, we make it complex, and there are complexities about anytime you get into the human psyche and everything, but this is the cure. So let me read it. You all know it, but let me just read it, chapter 13. If I could, I'm reading it in the New Living Version. If I could speak all the languages of earth and of angels, but didn't love others, I would only be a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I had the gift of prophecy, and if I understood all of God's secret plans, can you imagine that, understanding all of God's secret plans, and possessed all knowledge? Just think of the internet, how much is on that. If you possessed all of that knowledge, you didn't have to carry around a cell phone because you already knew it. Let's see, where was I? Possessed all knowledge, and if I had such faith that I could move mountains, but didn't love others, I would be nothing. I mean, you put this on the scale over here, and then love on this side. This is nothing. That's astounding. I mean, that is an incredibly astounding thing to say. And he says, if I gave everything I have to the poor, everything, and even sacrificed my body, in other words, I died, gave my life, I could boast about it. But if I didn't love others, I would have gained nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It is not irritable, and it keeps no record of being wronged. It does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up. Love never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance. Prophecy and speaking in unknown languages and special knowledge will become useless, but love will last forever. Now our knowledge is partial and incomplete, and even the gift of prophecy reveals only part of the whole picture. But when the time of perfection comes, these partial things will become useless. When I was a child, I spoke and thought and reasoned as a child. But when I grew up, I put away childish things. Now we see things imperfectly, like puzzling reflections in a mirror, but then we will see everything with perfect clarity. All that I know now is partial and incomplete, but then I will know everything completely, just as God now knows me completely. Three things will last forever: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. So I'm not going to, try to do an expository breakdown of everything in this. We're pretty familiar with this. But just to kind of give it an outline, a framework here. So first, he says in the first three verses, he just basically is talking about the superiority of love, agape love. Here's a quote. What is agape love? It loves without changing. It is a self-giving love that gives without demanding or expecting repayment. It is a love so great that it can be given to the unlovable. A love that gives even when it is rejected. It gives because it wants to. It is a love that does not give in order to receive. Agape comes from the word agony. The Greek root is from the root agony, meaning one great propulsion of our being toward one great passion, a sacrificial giving, absorbing kind of love. Love loves because it has to. That's what agape love is. It's Paul took that word, before Paul elevated it to that meaning, it was just another word in the Greek language for love. But Paul elevates it to try to describe it in terms of what God has done, how God has loved us, how Christ has loved us. And so he takes this word agape and uses it here in 1 Corinthians 13. So it's superior to the greatest, if you could speak in the language of angels, angelic language, that would be pretty impressive. If you could speak all the languages of the planet, that's what John Haar is all about, is translating the Jesus film into every language on the earth. And look how long it takes them. They've been working on this stuff. But if you just knew it, Matthew Carroll knows 6 of them, but there's I don't know how many hundreds of languages there are. But if you could do that, you could speak like an angel, but you didn't have love, it says you'll be a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. I kind of rather would say you're like a chalk screech on it, fingernails, Yeah, so you get, Stephanie's going, ooh, just mentioning it. And then it's, if you have the ability to prophesy, now he's speaking specifically to the people who are using their spiritual gifts. He could stand up and prophesy and say things and speak in tongues and all that. He says, prophecy, understood all of God's secrets, plans, and possessed all knowledge. And if I had such faith that I could move mountains, but didn't have love for others, I would be nothing. It discounts all of that. It's not going to impress God. It might impress people, but in the end, it doesn't do anything. And if I gave everything, the ultimate sacrifice, and you don't have love, I would have gained nothing. So that's what, when you read that, then, what should our response be? I better work on my love. I better, figure this out, because he's saying it's the most important thing. That bottom line with those first 3 verses is saying love is the most important thing that you can have in your life. If you don't have love for other people, you're wasting your life. And that's an astounding thing to say, but it's so true. It's like the song, what the world needs now is love, sweet love. We don't need another mountain to climb, or, another whatever, all this other stuff. And that song is absolutely right. That's what Paul is saying. Without love, it doesn't matter. And then he goes on then and he begins to describe what love is. And he doesn't go say a whole lot about that. He says two words first, that love is patient and kind. Love is patient and kind. You know, patient means long suffering. You're going to put up with somebody, bear up under, and kind. And kind means, it's basically what, you know, stand in somebody else's shoes. It's to identify with the other person. It's to identify that I'm a human being, you're a human being, you have value in God's eyes, I have value in God's eyes. I'm loved by God, you're loved by God, and then to treat people accordingly on that basis. That's kindness. You're going to treat them as though they are valuable and worth an infinite kind of love to God. And then he says that love rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up. It never loses faith. It is always hopeful and endures through every circumstance. That's what love is. And then he talks about what love is not. And love is not jealous. It's not boastful. It's not proud. It's not rude. It does not demand its own way. It is not irritable. And it keeps no record of being wronged. It does not rejoice about injustice. This sounds like social media to me. I mean, really, it's, you know, that's our political system. It operates on that basis. I mean, it does all those things. That characterizes. But that's not love. It's not love. So if that is something in your life that you struggle with, put it in this context. It's not something, or if you don't struggle with it, that's really the problem. If, you know, some people, well, I just have a hot temper. Like, okay, that gives me an out. So so you got a hot temper, I can blow up anybody. Well, I can't, I'm a grump until I get my coffee in the morning, you know. Well, that's not what love is. And then he talks about the permanence of love in verse 8. Prophecy and speaking in unknown languages and special knowledge will become useless, but love will last forever. Love is something that's permanent. These other things, non-love, isn't going to last. It's not, jealousy and boastfulness and pride and rudeness and demanding your own way, all of those things, they aren't going to last. They're destructive things. But love is something that is going to last. It's permanent. It will last forever. So that sounds like, well, I need to invest in love. I need to get my master's in love. That is what life is all about. Loving God, loving people. And then he describes the growth of love. He says, now our knowledge is partial and incomplete, and even the gift of prophecy reveals only part of the whole picture. But when the time of perfection comes, these partial things will become useless. When I was a child, I spoke and thought and reasoned as a child. But when I grew up, I put my childish things away. So when he's talking to these Corinthians who are, they're just like, I'm the mature guy. I'm the spiritual giant. I've really, really advanced beyond others. He's just saying, no, you're a child. Whatever you know, it's only just a little bit. And that's what people, as they get older and older, well, a lot of people, they just begin to realize, I don't know much. I talked to my 4-year-old or 5-year-old when they were that age. They knew everything. I mean, absolutely, no matter what you said, they would have a better way to do it, and just knew. They didn't know anything. But what he's saying here is that we're not going to grow to maturity until we see Christ. When I grew up, I put away childish things. Oh, I left out. Didn't I leave out a section there? Oh, gosh, at 9, 10. No, that's just, yeah, it's right, because it's a different version. So it's the growth of love. And then he goes on to that last 13th verse, which is interesting. Chapter 13 has 13 verses. The superiority of love. These things will last forever. Faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. Love is superior. And I was thinking about that. And first of all, in other translations, it usually says, and now abide these three, faith, hope, and love. Here in Living Bible, he says, these things will last forever. And I thought, that's not right, because, when we get to heaven, are we going to have faith? We're going to see Jesus face to face. So do we still need faith? And when I read this, I thought, well, let's, think about that. Yeah. We are always going to have to trust God. It won't stop. We will continue to have to trust God, that he is good. I mean, remember, because Satan lived in the presence of God, and he didn't put his faith and trust in God. He rebelled against God. So we're always going to have at least some element of faith and trust in God and his goodness, that he's the one providing and sustaining and everything. So, okay. And hope, I thought, hope, is going to be fulfilled. We aren't going to have to hope for Jesus to come again. We're going to be there and all of that. But then I thought, yeah, but you're still going to, who knows how time's going to function and everything, but it's going to be like, yeah, it's hope that the next day is going to be better than this day. And so I don't know, but the one thing that's concrete and sure is that love is not going to change. We are still going to love other people. We're still going to love God. That's going to be the common denominator for every person there, is love of God and love of people. And all this other stuff is going to be gone. There won't be jealousy. There won't be anger. There won't be division. There won't be, you can just go down the line. That's going to be gone. And so every situation there in the book of 1 Corinthians that these people are practicing and doing and struggling with and everything, this chapter is Paul's answer to all of those situations. If you will, he says, I show you a more excellent way. And this is the excellent way. This is the way of Jesus. This is the way of Christ that he instructed us to live. And Paul has put in this beautiful chapter, just incredible language. And he says, if you will pursue love, that all these other issues that are working against you as a church will begin to fade, will begin to diminish, because that's how love works. Love will overcome those things. So here, as we go into our discussion time, let me see how we're doing. Well, our brief discussion time. In light of this chapter, I think this answers itself pretty clear after going through this. Is it God's will for us to be afraid to love people? Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that God wants us to love people fearlessly. He wants us to love people without being afraid of them.